Should I just tell Jason to access it on the website?
Yeah, just tell him to try again.
Good afternoon. All right, it's a little loud. Okay. Welcome to the Virginia Governor's Housing Conference. We are so happy to be in person. So this is the shelter, the Hotel to Shelter Permanent Supportive Housing Conversion session. And our two speakers today are Anthony Hara and Elizabeth Neese. Is it Neese or Nice?
Nice.
Nice, that's even better. Okay, so Anthony is the Executive Director of the Thomas Jefferson Area Coalition for the Homeless, and his work is dedicated to making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring in our communities. He's been in that role since 2017, but he has 11 years of experience in HMIS administration, homeless management information system administration. And I will go ahead and also go ahead and talk about Elizabeth. And she is a senior real estate development officer with the Virginia Supportive Housing. And as a member of the real estate development team, she's responsible for the day-to-day project management of VSH's affordable housing programs. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Anthony. There are two other individuals that are not here today, but they will be helping answer questions if you have them. So we're going to introduce them when we get to the question and answer period. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Michelle, for the introduction. It's really good to be here to talk about this project that we've been able to work on over the past year, although it seems hard to place timeframes to the past year. I don't know if anyone can relate to that. Almost 2 years now. So yeah, we wanted to talk about this project in Charlottesville that we have coined as the Premier Circle Project, which is the name of the road that this project is on. So that's why we call it the Premier Circle Project. And just wanted to start with a quick overview of what's happening now with the project, and then talk a little bit about how it all came to be, and then talk about a bit more of how operations are going, and then what are the next phases of the project as well. So this is what's going on right now. It's a renovated motel. It was 100 rooms. The motel was about 100 rooms. We renovated at this point 63 units. We're hoping to renovate even more, and I will talk a little bit more about that later on. And there are currently on-site supportive services. Again, 63 units of non-congregate shelter, which many of you probably are familiar with that term, but it means basically private room shelter, as opposed to large rooms like this, or people sleeping in cots, which is a kind of the more traditional style of emergency shelter. So that's what's happening currently. The next phase of the project is actually going to be on the same exact site. And very exciting that we are actually developing permanent housing on the site. So in addition to providing current shelter with the existing structure of the motel, we're going to be actually developing new structure. So the site will be demolished, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on. But there's going to be 80 units of permanent supportive housing developed by Virginia Supportive Housing. Elizabeth's here to talk about that portion. And then 60 units of affordable housing developed by Piedmont Housing Alliance, as well as a separate dedicated commercial building on the site. So from a motel of about 100 units to 140 units, which is pretty great, of affordable housing and permanent supportive housing. So how did this all come to be? It was a whirlwind project, and preparing for this, it was pretty cool to look back on this. We started this process and this partnership to try to make this project work around June of 2020, and pretty incredible, all the different parts of the project and the partnerships in particular that I'll talk a bit more about. But we were able to secure the site with in less than a year, which is pretty amazing. So I think a key piece to it was the partnerships that we had developed early on that connected homelessness to affordable housing. And this was a partnership in Charlottesville that I was a part of. We were one of the founding members. Thomas Jefferson Area Coalition for the Homeless was one of the founding members of this group, Charlottesville Albemarle Affordable Housing Coalition. So it was TJAC, which is my organization, we're a COC lead agency. We work on ending homelessness locally, as well as Piedmont Housing Alliance. They're an affordable housing developer in the area. CRHA, they're a local housing authority, and AHIP, which is a home repair program, as well as Habitat for Humanity. So the idea was that we wanted to come together to connect and meaningfully connect, both for ourselves to see where their partnerships could develop, but also for the community, for local government, for funders, to connect the idea that housing needs across a spectrum are important, and that any gaps in housing needs across the continuum from affordable rentals to affordable homeownership, to not affordable homeownership and not affordable rentals. Actually, any gap across that spectrum is going to put undue pressure on other parts of the housing ecosystem, so that it needs to be a balanced system. And so we started this group to kind of cover homeless services to affordable rentals, like I said, to affordable homeownership and even home repair, to advocate collectively about housing needs in the community. And so when I first came into the position in Charlottesville, one of my express goals early on was to support the development of permanent supportive housing in our community. Some of you might be familiar in this world. This might be a review, but in case it's not, permanent supportive housing is, it's just unequivocally the best way to address chronic homelessness, and I think all types of homelessness, frankly. It focuses on the solution to homelessness. And so I wanted to create more of it, in particular because without enough permanent supportive housing and enough affordable rentals for people to move into, you can't really get ahead of homelessness. I know it's a crazy idea, but it's real, and it's easy to get distracted from that point. So this partnership was really key because it helped us develop, again, close relationships with affordable housing developers. The other kind of crucial piece to this project moving forward was the pandemic. And housing has always been healthcare, but that fact was made exceptionally clear during the pandemic. And it was, it was unfortunate that it took a pandemic for, I think, the broader community. Probably everybody in this room has that understanding, but the broader community really understood that housing is healthcare on a different level, that having people not have their own space to live was not only dangerous and unhealthy for those individuals, but for the community at large. What this did was it put a focus on homelessness in particular, because that provided an exceptional risk during the pandemic. So housing was healthcare. This was huge, and this was an opportunity and an impetus and an urgency to solve the issue with housing. The other part of this, very much related, was non-congregate shelter became the focus for how we provided emergency shelter locally. And I'm sure lots of you can relate to that shift that we all kind of went through across the country. Congregate shelters weren't safe, so we moved into hotels, basically. And we were able to do this from the incredible support from DHCD. So Michelle, shout out to DHCD, as well as other local government support. Shout out to Albemarle County as well, and also local philanthropic groups supported this shift. But it did take a whole community for us to be able to make this shift happen. I'm sure all of you can relate to that. But this was a crucial piece. We needed non-congregate shelter to keep people safe from the pandemic. And this was the other side of it too. So non-congregate shelter was a game changer for us. It really did help us locally prevent an outbreak of COVID-19 in the homeless population. Still haven't had an outbreak to date, and I think it's very largely in part due to the fact that we were able to shelter people in non-congregate shelter since basically May of 2020, and still are continuing to be able to do so. But it was lacking an important component to the issue. And so if there's any math whizzes in the room, anyone want to solve for X in this equation? I mean it, someone yell it out. Shelter, yes, yeah, Nichelle nailed it. As she would. Housing or home. So homelessness plus housing equals not homeless. I know it's a crazy idea, I know. But every opportunity I can get to talk about this point, I take, because I find it to be really important to come back to the core issue of what homelessness is, which is a lack of housing. That's what homelessness is. It is not the symptoms that often comes from homelessness. It's really easy for us, and myself included, to get distracted from this point. So anyways, I pull this up because non-congregate sheltering was important and vital and still is, but it was missing this piece to the puzzle. We needed an exit plan out of shelter. We needed a way to really actually address homelessness. And so we had a crazy idea that basically came up as a result of it. And again, building on to those partnerships that I talked about previously with affordable housing developers, we also were very lucky to have a strong partnership with a local foundation in Charlottesville, the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation. And Ebony Bug in particular has been a great thought partner for us. And they were providing support in COVID for immediate relief of issues that communities were having. And so I made a huge ask of like $2 million some to the foundation, because projecting out the expenses. I mean, do you remember those days early in the pandemic when we were like, yeah, maybe we got to do this for like a month or two? Remember that? Yeah, that quickly faded to like, yeah. Anyways, you all get the idea. But we didn't know, but we were projecting out, well, I'll probably have to do this for a long time. We were paying about $100,000 a month to provide non-congregate shelter in local hotels, which was worth it, but it was very expensive and not that sustainable. And so Ebony, I was making this ask, and she was like, well, what are you going to use the money for? And I was like, well, we're going to pay hotels. And she was like, well, then what? And I was like, that's a great question. I was like, well, what if we buy a hotel? And instead of scoffing at the idea, she was like, yes, let's focus on that. So huge credit to our partner as a funder to be open and willing to think outside the box and really not scoff at this idea and move forward. So with her blessing, we started moving forward on building a partnership to see if this could work. It really felt crazy, but you know what? It was worthwhile to see if this would be possible. So we started pulling in partners from the community that could make this work and that we would need, which included the foundation, obviously, for funding support, financial support to make this happen. People in congregations engaged in ministries, or PACHM is our local funded emergency shelter provider. Piedmont Housing Alliance is an affordable housing developer and manager that I mentioned. They're a part of the Charlottesville area, or Charlottesville-Albemarle Affordable Housing Coalition. So they were a partner from that. Us with TJAC and Virginia Supportive Housing as permanent supportive housing developers. So the idea was to try to buy a hotel because it could provide the immediate needs for non-congregate shelter, leading into development of permanent housing. That was the idea. If we could get both done on one project, that would be awesome. Everybody kind of agreed. And so we pulled these folks together, and it kept moving forward, which was pretty incredible. Just couple key pieces again. PHA had a particularly unique role in this because they are not a homeless service provider, and yet our partnership, their understanding of homeless issues, led their director, Sunshine Mathon, to again also not scoff at the idea when I presented it to him, but we needed an entity that was willing to purchase the site, so they were willing to do that, even though this wasn't really their wheelhouse. They saw the needs and they saw their role in this. So now they are also developing on the site too, so it's a win-win. But it was, without that support, without that willingness to step up, try something, take a risk, this project would not have moved forward without a developer willing to purchase, be the purchaser of the site. Obviously, VSH would be the developer of permanent supportive housing as well. So those were the different partners that really kind of helped move this forward further on and keep moving down. So once we had these partners together, we started looking for hotels that were for sale. And lo and behold, there was a hotel, an old motel that was for sale. That was serendipitous for us. And so we started continuing to move forward the conversations, and we knew early on that we would need a zoning change on the site. I'll talk a little bit more about that process from the county's perspective and other county partnerships that were needed to make this happen. But it was zoned for basically commercial, was not zoned for residential. So we were going to need to do a zoning change, and we knew we needed to start on that very quickly. So that was one of the next pieces that we started on. But also just wanted to show you this graph. This is our point in time count data since 2012 in our COC area for chronically homeless individuals. And you can see in 2012, we were at an all-time high with about 76 individuals experiencing chronic homelessness. That also happened to be the year the Crossings in Charlottesville opened, which is a Virginia supportive housing development, permanent supportive housing, 60 units of permanent supportive housing on site, 30 were reserved specifically for chronically homeless individuals. And you can see in the next 2 years following that, incredible decline of 50% of chronic homeless population declined in those next 2 years. So we had the blessing of having local data and the local experience of opening a permanent supportive housing development in our community. And it was it was a very positive experience for everybody involved. And that was also crucial because that was able to provide kind of the trust in VSH and the trust in the process and the trust that it would actually make a huge difference. And just interestingly, you can see in the data, we kind of have stagnated in our progress towards chronic homelessness in the years since. And in fact, over the last couple of years, predominantly because of the pandemic, I think, and being able to have people in hotels and have better data, but our numbers are starting to grow. And so we need more permanent supportive housing. That's the takeaway from this. But the other takeaway is that it works, and we had local data to support that, which was huge. So once we identified a hotel, we started working on the next phase of the project, which was really partnering with the county to make, for zoning and the other aspects of the project that we needed to get through. So this information is from Stacy Pethia. I have her permission to share this on her behalf, but this is some information about the project from the county's perspective. And she's the housing policy manager for Albemarle County. So the county helped us out with funding for non-congregate shelter. You can see in May, they provided a significant amount of money for us to continue keeping people in hotels. And they also had a similar feeling though. They were like, we want to continue supporting this, but we want something more permanent that comes from this, and so they were in the same mindset of wanting something, substantial that was going to last. And so when this idea came through, Stacy and the county in general were great partners in expediting this process, because again, this can be a complicated process. I'm not sure if any of you have gone through this, probably some of you have with zoning. Getting things like this approved can be a lengthy process, but this really, we were able to pull this through with alacrity, I would say. So in February, the zoning was approved. And then there was a special exception also. We needed a special exception to provide shelter on the site in addition to providing housing. So we were able to get that approved as well. And then finally, once the zoning was through, we were able to move forward on actually the negotiations for purchase of the actual site, which occurred in May of 2021. So just about 6 months ago almost. So in May, the sale went through. And just a little bit about that. So we helped some of the people who were living, because there were people living in the hotel at the time when it was purchased. And so many of them were able to find alternative, hotel stays, but it was one of the cheaper places to live in our community. And people were essentially living in that hotel, which was kind of the problem that we were trying to address by building affordable housing. So there were people that we had to assist with transition plans, and we did. And so that we were happy to be able to have done that. But there were about 7 households that didn't have any other place to go. And we were essentially living in this motel, because there weren't other affordable housing places that would accept, let's say, their background. Interestingly, they were paying quite a lot of money to live in this hotel room. But many of you probably know this too, but the issue is that a lot of times people have criminal backgrounds or eviction histories, and they can't find a rental in the community. So they resort to living in hotels. This is the problem that we were trying to address. But anyways, that was a part of it. So once the hotel was actually purchased, the other part of the county partnership was actually project-based vouchers, which, again, many of you probably know this is a crucial piece to making these projects work. And so in April, the project VSH was awarded 22 project-based vouchers for permanent supportive housing development, which was a crucial piece and was kind of the final part of at least this part of the process or the partnership with the county. So why the county helped, Stacy again put this together to kind of highlight some of the areas that from their perspective, they felt like this was a project they wanted to support. The pandemic highlighted an additional need for housing, specifically for people experiencing homelessness. They saw that. There was a homeless preference in their affordable housing or their kind of local, it's called the Office of Housing. It's essentially the public housing equivalent. There was a homeless preference, so they saw that as a connection. I'll talk a bit about the county plan, but the county housing policy actually included a part of the plan that specifically said we want to support the development of permanent supportive housing, which was really key. So having that built into the actual county's housing plan was also key. And it provided a ladder of housing opportunities. So it was permanent supportive housing, but also of just general affordable housing on site. And that was seen as kind of an opportunity for people moving to different types of housing that they might want later on. There was previous experience. They had previous experience with the crossings in Charlottesville as well with Virginia Supportive Housing. So that was also a positive experience that they could build upon. And they also wanted to partner with local nonprofits to address a community need. So these were all reasons that the county felt that this was a good project to support. There was also planning support that they provided in the zoning process in particular, thinking through the site, thinking through the road. There were lots of issues that we had to work through in partnership with the county to get this thing through. A couple of them, we didn't get a lot of pushback, which was great, from the community, which we can talk about more if there's any questions about that. But there were concerns about accessibility to amenities, to other kind of interests in the area. And so we worked with the county to kind of alleviate those concerns that the Board of Supervisors may have had or other planners. And so there was a great partnership with staff through that process as well. This is just a little excerpt from the county housing policy plan. And so Stacy, we've been colleagues for a while. She reached out to me directly, which was incredible to have that kind of direct support. And she said, hey, I'm putting together a new housing policy for the county. I want to include issues about homelessness. Let's talk about how that can go. And so I had direct access to be able to talk with Stacy about permanent supportive housing, right? Homeless plus X equals not homeless anymore. So we were able to put this specifically in the county's plan. Again, that was crucial, really key for us to be able to have that. And so now she can check this part off of the county housing plan because of this project. So that was the process with the county. And basically, like I said, the project Piedmont Housing Alliance was able to close on the project in May. And then we had to renovate the site. I'll have a picture of a kind of a before and after of the hotel rooms, but it was 100 units in the hotel, but many of them were not usable in their current state, and we had to do extensive renovation to make it usable. And there were some rooms where they looked fine, some rooms didn't look fine, but in all the rooms there was extensive mold growth behind the wallpaper and the carpets, and so that was the first thing we just figured out. What do we need to do to make this a safe, healthy place for people to be over the next 2 to 3 years? And we were through support from the county, from UVA as well as philanthropic support. We were able to get money to renovate the rooms and move people in. And Martin Horn was the local contractor we worked with. They were awesome to work with for the renovation project. But that basically started as soon as we possibly could once the property transitioned over. And we were able to move people in. Well, actually, I'm sorry. I got the time frame wrong. People moved in May, but the actual place closed in April. So we used that month to renovate, and then people were able to move in May. But once people moved in, basically people moved out of the other hotel we had folks into this hotel that our partner PHA now owned. And Pacham was providing shelter and case management. They were operating shelter and case management for our non-congregate shelter and local hotels, and so they transitioned operations to this site. And this is a little bit about their operations of the shelter portion of the project that I'll talk about. So currently there's 68 guests there in 63 rooms. And again, we are hoping to renovate even more to have access to as much of the site as we possibly can. And so we are currently doing some fundraising to finish those last 30 or so usable rooms on the site. Some adult couples basically are the reason why there's more people than rooms, but otherwise we're not currently serving families with children on the site. It's just for adults or adult couples. This is a breakdown of the age range for folks that we're sheltering. This probably isn't a surprise for a lot of homeless service providers in the audience, but we are, the population we've been sheltering includes more elderly people than I think ever before, particularly because of the pandemic, I think. So 30% are people over 60, 62, which was even still, and I know this, and I work in this field, that was still surprising for me to kind of think about and realize. Lots of significant health issues, obviously, with a population that we're working with who are experiencing homelessness. So just grateful that we can provide safe, private spaces for these folks to stay. This is the breakdown by race, which basically mimics the homeless population in Charlottesville, significantly overrepresented by people who identify as Black. But this is the population also that, or this is the breakdown of people who are staying in the project currently. So about 50% Black, about 50% white. I guess that's 2.9%, mixed race or other races. Gender also basically mimics our general homeless population as well, about 70% male, 30% female. And this graph is a little bit difficult to read. Just read the percentages, because they don't add up to like 100 or anything like that. So it's a little bit confusing, but significantly, I'll draw your attention to this one, which is just chronic health conditions, other chronic health conditions. So 70% of people identify, and actually we have medical records for because of FEMA, which is awesome support, but also FEMA. But we have medical records for these folks, so we know actually, which is pretty incredible. But just lots of complicated health conditions, as you can see, that we're providing support for on site at this project. So some of the services include, basically there's 24-hour staffing on site by Pacham and Pacham staff. And I have to give a big shout out to Pacham for this project, for stepping up. Jason, their director, is on the chat. He wasn't able to join us today, but if you have questions about it, in particular, he can chat in responses later on. But Pacham has been a partner. They've been providing shelter since 2004. And they predominantly, or before the pandemic, provided like seasonal cold weather shelter, essentially. And we're a pretty small team. They would shelter a lot of people during the winter. They would shelter for about half of the year. But when the pandemic hit, that became all year round, right? Because that's what we needed. And we also have a Salvation Army locally that's all year round. But Pacham was just the seasonal shelter that opened up for cold weather shelter. And so basically this shift to full-time 24-hour staffing, basically operating a hotel, was a huge expanding of their mission, well, not their mission, but expanding of what they provided, the services they provided. So they staffed up quickly, and this transition had to happen basically within a month, basically, to staff up and be able to support these folks. So it was a lot of shift for them and a lot of new staff, but they provide 24-hour staffing, and basically it's emergency shelter, although it's also not, because I'm sure many of you people know, many of you who have worked with non-congregate shelter, it's just a different thing, and it's really unique, and the needs are quite unique. And so they were a perfect partner to work with because they were providing support services for people in local hotels for this whole year. So they had a lot of experience with this, and were able to come in and provide this support on site as well. So each guest is assigned a case manager at the project, and they work with the general issues that people work with in shelter. So overcoming housing barriers. It's very housing focused. Applying for benefits, obtaining identification, coordinating medical care, and much more. Connection to other community supports. I will say, I'm sure many of you can probably relate, but exiting out of non-congregate shelter is quite a challenge these days because of the pandemic, because of the lack of affordable housing. So, we do what we can to get people ready with identification and other types of things that landlords might be looking for, but we have rental assistance available for a lot of these folks, and we can't use it. I'm sure, again, many of you can relate to that. So stays are quite longer in non-congregate shelter. Some of the folks have been with us for more than a year. It just is very different than traditional emergency shelter. So the services have had to adapt as well, even though they're still based in this kind of basic format. Lots of volunteer opportunities on site as well, from keeping the grounds looking okay, mowing the lawns around the shelter site, to folding sheets. I mean, it's basically, we just took over an old motel, so there's an industrial laundry machine that that staff operate, and we do linens for the guests and everything. So lots of opportunities for volunteers to be a part of the project as well. Obviously, we had to be careful about how we did that with the pandemic, but they've been keeping good safety protocols with that as well. This is a really awesome part of the project that I wanted to highlight, which is a partnership with UVA Medical Center, which is where they have a clinic on site twice a month, where they actually bring medical students on site and provide care for guests, and are able to actually establish relationships over time because many of them do stay. And there's also a lot of the same students, and there's also like an overseeing medical doctor or clinician who's able to oversee that project as well and prescribe if as needed. So it's an invaluable opportunity for shelter guests in this project, and it's done on site, which is also pretty crucial. So that brings us essentially to the next phase of the project, which is permanent supportive housing. So again, just a quick recap of the project. We started out just with a crazy idea, and then really I credit the partners that were willing and able to address a unique need in the pandemic during unique times, think outside the box. And we also had a lot of particular pieces in place that really helped this along, which was a great partnership from the county, great partnership from the Foundation for Funding Support, from shelter providers willing to shift in a new way to address the emerging need. And again, this all happened within a year, which is pretty incredible. So current sheltering is expected to continue through 2024, which is when the first permanent supportive housing development will hopefully open, and Elizabeth can talk a bit more about that. Development schedules can be somewhat tricky, I know, but that's their expected opening date. So, and we plan to shelter folks there until, as long as we possibly can. That's kind of the part of the project. So happy to answer any questions during the Q&A portion, but it's a little bit about how this kind of came together and what are some of the key pieces I think that made this work in Charlottesville. So Elizabeth. Oh,
All right, thanks, Anthony. So I'm going to begin this afternoon by telling you all a little bit about Virginia Supportive Housing, or VSH, before diving into more of the details about the Premier Circle PSH portion of the project. Virginia Supportive Housing is a community development nonprofit that was founded in Richmond in 1988 with the mission of ending homelessness. At the time, VSH was comprised of just a group of community volunteers who saw homelessness as an issue in their community, but really felt like there was a lack of available and effective solutions, particularly for single adults. So after several months of research and really trying to dive into the root causes of this issue, this group of individuals identified permanent supportive housing, which again is the integration of affordable housing with supportive services, as the best way to address homelessness. VSH works to meet this mission by providing permanent affordable housing and on-site supportive services to homeless and low-income individuals across the Commonwealth. Over time, VSH has grown from this group of dedicated community volunteers to an organization of a little over 150 individuals, serving about 1,600 individuals annually across the Commonwealth. VSH has a 98% success rate, meaning that 98% of the individuals that we serve do not return to homelessness. At VSH, we operate our permanent supportive housing under the Housing First model, which calls for housing individuals in low barrier entry affordable housing first, and then wrapping them up in those on-site supportive services at varying different levels to help them maintain their housing stability. And over time, this leads to both increased independence as well as prolonged stability. I'd like to share with you an example of this model in action, featuring Cookie, a VSH resident at the crossings at 4th and Preston, which Anthony talked about earlier. Waving to my folks in the back to play the video.
Everybody, I'm not gonna joke, I'm gonna have to show you. Everybody calls me Cookie. It's been like, I've had that name since probably 79, I reckon. y'all don't even know nothing about 79. His name is Psycho. He's been with me for about 12 and a half years now. Actually, more than that, because his birthday's May 2nd, and he'll be 13. But he's everything. Before, it was wonderful. Could have been better. But I guess I should just tell the whole story. I reckon when I was in school, I was on the way home from football practice, last day of 2-a-day practices. So we'd finished morning practice, was heading home to get some lunch and whatnot. And the dude wrecked the truck I was in. And it threw me out the truck and I landed on my head in the middle of the road about 60 miles an hour. So that just kind of almost took me out. The doctors told my parents when I got to the hospital that it's not going to be good. But, you know, I guess the good Lord looked there for me. As I come on there, like a champ. And then I did great in life for a long time. Then back about, I don't know, 2002, 2003, something happened and I just lost it all, flipped there kind of, you know. And then I didn't have a job, lost all my money. I had some money. I lost all of that, lost everything. Because like I said, I didn't have no place to live. I was slept on my daughter's couch for about almost a year and a half, 2 years. And I found out my ex-wife, she got in here and she was telling me about it. So I finally got in touch with Tawana and she worked with me and worked with the guy's name, Bill Perry, works in the Almar housing thing. And between the two of them, they hooked me up. I don't know, I had this positive attitude that it was going to happen, you know. So that's about the way I went through with it. Like I said, it's kind of lengthy, but it's not a big deal. I mean, once things happen, boom, she was ready for me to come in right then, you know. So that was great. The way it just turned around, boom, I'm sitting there, I got a place to live. Hours time, when we pulled in here, hours time, I was in home. It was pretty cool. I'd never been happier. Jumping from house to house, say I stay here for a while, that kind of thing, that don't cut it. You got to have a place of your own you can call home. Yeah, that's basics of life. And I can honestly say this is one of the best things ever happened to me, believe it or not. When all the dust settles, you know, this certainly has been a blessing.
Thank you. As I move through the remainder of this presentation, I just think it's important not to lose sight of who we're doing this for. It's for people like Cookie and his dog Psycho too, who I just love. VSH owns and manages over 650 units of permanent supportive housing in 17 properties across 6 localities. By 2024, we'll own over 800 units across 8 localities. VSH also manages 30 units of permanent supportive housing at the Virginia Beach Housing Resource Center, for those of you who are familiar with that project. VSH opened its first property, New Clay House, in Richmond in 1992, and it was one of the first PSH properties in the state of Virginia. Over time, our building model has evolved, but our mission has remained the same. Our building design and construction types really vary from project to project. We develop new construction projects, such as Church Street Station Studios right here in Norfolk, which is pictured on the bottom left up there, as well as adaptive reuse projects and historic renovation projects. New Clay House, which I just mentioned, is shown on the bottom right here and was both a new construction and an historic adaptive reuse of a brewery that dates back to the late 1800s. So our projects really vary based on where they're at. VSH is licensed by the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services to provide assertive community treatment, or ACT, services, and is a core certified organization, which recognizes organizations that have a robust commitment, capacity, and competency in providing resident services in coordination with affordable housing. The on-site supportive services that VSH provides our residents includes, but is not limited to, case management, housing stabilization services, independent living skills, community engagement and social support, transition planning, and employment, education, and vocational support. Now on to Premier Circle. As Anthony mentioned, VSH was involved in the conceptualization of Premier Circle pretty early on. We had actually been looking for another site in the city of Charlottesville to develop another permanent supportive housing property for several years to help expand our footprint beyond the crossings, which opened in 2012. Unfortunately, for those of you who are familiar with the city of Charlottesville, there's really not much availability of suitable sites that are also affordable. That's the kicker. So developing PSH is just inherently very expensive, and acquisition costs can really make or break a project for us. And that's one of the reasons that this particular project in partnership was so attractive to us, because it was a site that not only met our site acquisition standards, but that was also reasonably affordable due to those partnerships that Anthony discussed earlier. Premier Circle PSH, which is outlined in the blue there, will be 80 units of studio apartments for homeless and low-income individuals earning 50% or less of the area median income. It's our goal that at least 60 of the units will have project-based rental subsidies, and as noted earlier on one of Stacy's slides, we've already received a commitment for some of those project-based rental subsidies. Each unit will be approximately 350 square feet and will feature a kitchenette with all full-size appliances as well as a full bathroom. Units come fully furnished with a bed, nightstand, dresser, kitchen table, and 2 chairs. 12 units will be completely accessible for individuals with disabilities, as well as 2 units for individuals with sensory impairments. And all 80 units will be designed to meet Virginia Housing's universal design standards. The building will have an extensive security system and off-street parking. And in addition to the apartments, the building will have a community room with a warming kitchen, a computer room, a fitness room, a phone room, laundry facilities, a front desk, and staff offices for our on-site property management and our on-site supportive services staff. The front desk will be staffed 16 hours a day, and there will be a night monitor on duty every evening. The development will be Earthcraft Gold certified for resource and energy efficiency and will feature a roof-mounted solar photovoltaic panel system. The property will also meet the energy efficiency requirements for Housing Innovations in Energy Efficiency, or the HIE program administered through DHCD. The total development budget for Premier Circle is approximately $20 million, which includes our acquisition costs. The project received an allocation of low-income housing tax credits in March of this year, and will also include funding from Virginia Housing, DHCD, the City of Charlottesville, Albemarle County, the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta, and several private foundations. For those of you who are familiar with our projects, you know that pulling together $20 million worth of funding takes quite a large number of sources. I still think we actually hold a record with Virginia Housing for the most sources in a single project. That project had over 25 different individual sources. Hopefully this one doesn't have that, but never say never. Once all the financing is in place and we've received all of our HUD and governmental approvals, we hope to start construction in 2023, and we anticipate construction completion occurring in 2024. And last but not least, we have the final phase of the project, which is the development of multifamily apartments by Piedmont Housing Alliance. Again, Mandy with Piedmont Housing Alliance couldn't be here in person, but she will be on the chat to answer any questions you might have about this in the Q&A portion. This property will have about 60 rental units, primarily 1 and 2 bedrooms, for individuals and or families earning 80% or less of the area median income. PHA plans to obtain project-based vouchers for 10% of the units to achieve deeper affordability. Additionally, the units will be designed to Passive House standards. This phase of the project will also include the sale of the commercial out parcel fronting Route 29, and their property is highlighted in blue there. And with that, we'll move into answering some of your questions. Thank you.
All right, so we're gonna take some questions, and I don't know if there's a microphone out there, so I would ask that if you ask a question, I'll repeat it if you don't have a microphone, just for anybody who may need that additional assistance. So I have a question before we get started. I gotta figure out which phone I have it on, but I do have a question. All right, just to start us off, can you tell us if there was any NIMBYism with this project? Because I'm really curious.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, yeah, you can. There really wasn't, which was pretty amazing. And I think it's unique to this project, but it's also unique to our community. There has been a large interest in affordable housing development in the area. Lots of support from the community and lots of support from both the city and the county. So that was already a plus. It was the zeitgeist of our of our community and our area. So that helped, but I think another really unique part of it was the site itself. So this was a old motel that was not so savory. Just I think you understand what I'm trying to say. There was a neighborhood that backed up against the site, and so, but this I think was seen as really an improvement of the existing site, and so I think that really helped a lot. And surprisingly, during public community meetings, during the zoning process for the project, there were concerns expressed by community members, by citizens, but they were like really nice, awesome concerns. They were like, well, what about crossing the road? Because it's on 29, which is a big road, because there's a grocery store on the other side. And so they were really thoughtful, very good concerns. They were not like, hey, I don't want a bunch of homeless people in my neighborhood. We did not get that kind of NIMBYism, which was incredible. And thankfully, we were able to address those concerns from the community and from the Board of Supervisors. There's bus stops close by. There's actually plans to include a bus stop right in front of the development as well, should things go well. And there's also quite a lot of amenities within walking distance on the same side of the street. So we kind of highlighted those aspects, and I think can kind of address a lot of people's concerns about it. So thankfully, we didn't get a lot of NIMBYism for this project, and I think again it was because of those factors there's already kind of the support for affordable housing in the community, and also because it was seen as largely an improvement on the existing site. Lots of 911 calls to the site, so yeah. Do you want to add anything to it? Yeah.
The only thing I think I would add is one of the additional concerns that came through during our rezoning process was the potential loss of a commercially zoned site. And this came mostly from the county and zoning, just in trying to adhere to their comprehensive plan and the plans for that area, particularly along Route 29. It's perfectly zoned for commercial. So one of the things that we ensured that we met in order to maintain that piece was having this commercial parcel along the portion of the site that fronts Route 29. So I think that's the only other really kind of big concern that came through. But again, we didn't really, that traditional NIMBYism didn't really occur, which was great.
All right, thank you. So, a question right there.
Adults that are 50 and over, what we know about homeless people that are 50 and over, they look like they're 70. My question is, what is your relationship with the area agency on aging in that region, which is the Jefferson area for aging?
Real quick, before y'all answer, the gist of that question was, what is the relationship with the area Department of Aging? Area Agency on Aging. Okay. What is your relationship with that agency?
Thank you, Nichelle. Great question. And thankfully, we do have, I think, a good partnership with JABA locally, which is the Area Board on Aging. Okay, area agency on aging, and actually have helped some of our clients with, making their units accessible through ramps or other kinds of, accessible amenities there. That's, from my knowledge at least, that's kind of been the focus of the partnership, but also connection with other kind of support needs. Those connections with clients and Java definitely do occur. If there's other ways, Jason can type into the chat potentially if there's other ways, but I know that that's been a significant way that they've partnered, is making units more accessible for folks who have needed it. But yeah, great question.
All right, right in front of the gentleman just asked a question.
I'm just curious about the hotel. Most hotels, they don't have ovens, stoves. How do you address that issue?
All right, this question is just a curiosity about the hotels and them typically not having ovens and those sort of amenities. How did y'all deal with that?
Yeah, great question. There are about 10 units on site that actually do have little ranges in it, but most of them do not. So we've had to provide food daily for guests ever since May, and we actually have been doing that in the hotels as well through partnerships with The Haven, which is a day shelter in Charlottesville, and Community Kitchen with Salvation Army in Charlottesville, with local churches through Pachem's kind of congregational support system. So we've had a lot of community support for meals, which has been fantastic. We are shifting now to contracts with just 2 kind of caterers now, moving forward to provide meals on site, but it's quite an operation, but we provide meals every day. Yeah. And also I should say that, some people just really like to do their own thing. I mean, they have SNAP. Yeah, I mean, people really take care of themselves as well. But yes, we do provide food for a lot of guests on site.
All right, real quick, I want to answer Jason Whitehead from Pachem, because I've got 2 phones going, so I can answer the questions from them. Jason said, we're meeting with Jabba, which is what you were talking about, in the next couple of weeks to explore the relationship. So that is already in the works. So maybe on this side.
So what are the long-term goals, once, especially the SRL, what the housing is in place?
Okay, so I'm sorry, and I keep repeating it because, again, trying to be very mindful of persons who may have any hearing difficulties. The question is, what are the long-term goals for the hotel with this project having SRO units, correct? That's the essence. All right, thank you.
Yeah. So you mean the long-term goals for like the shelter portion of it? Yeah, great question. So it's going to be a big challenge for, moving people out to permanent housing. Our commitment is that no one will be homeless because of the, sunsetting of the shelter project, because we will have to make room for development. If the schedule goes as planned, we'll have to close access to a portion of the site. We're estimating about half of the rooms. So we will be able to still have access to about half of the emergency shelter capacity after 2023, 2024, but that's still significant. And so, we're focusing on hopefully having, we're working on that now, but honestly, it's a challenge, and it's going to be something we will just have to not fill new units on turnover for, let's say, 6 months leading up to that time frame to move people out into housing, and so that we can, responsibly sunset half of that project. But that is a really important piece of the puzzle that we are, now focusing on, because we have about a year to plan for that. But it's going to be challenging. I mean, housing is difficult to come by. Good news is that we are building new housing, right, as a part of this project. And so hopefully many of the folks that we've been able to shelter will be clients that will be identified to move in. We are not able to guarantee current shelter clients access to permanent supportive housing because, homelessness changes over time, and we have a coordinated entry system process that, but many of them will be able to move into those units. So that's going to help, but we're going to have to do a lot of work to identify places in the community and move people in. Yeah.
All right, before I take another audience question, Laura, is there any questions coming in the chat? Okay, I didn't see them. I just see a number that keeps going up. Okay. All right, I'm gonna take somebody in the back, young lady, glasses, yep. Okay, this question was how did they make how did they make the approach to have some units at different subsidy levels?
So for the VSH portion, PSH, all of our properties are 50% or less of the area median income, particularly because we do obviously serve individuals experiencing homelessness as well as individuals experiencing chronic homelessness. And in fact, we find that most of our residents earn 30% or less of the area median income. So for us, it's just kind of a no-brainer based off the data of the individuals that we currently serve. Also, there's pretty significant gap of housing meeting individuals within that income range, particularly in the Charlottesville and Albemarle County areas. So for us, it's just kind of a model that we know that works. And we look at what the income levels are in the area that we're serving. Thankfully, we already have the crossings in this area, so we're familiar with it. And 80 additional units at that 50% or less works great for us. We will actually have also several units, most likely specifically designated for individuals that are 30% or less, and that would be tied to if we received National Housing Trust Fund funds through DHCD. I can't speak to Piedmont Housing Alliance, but Mandy might be able to answer that particular breakdown in the chat as well.
And it takes a moment. There's a little bit of a delay since they're online, so I may have to get back to you with that answer, but I will definitely do so. Did you want to answer it? Or?
Just that, project-based vouchers make it possible to serve that really no income to 30% income range, which is crucial. So again, I think you're shooting for 60 units or so.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and on that note, I'll add, Anthony joked earlier, he always plugs his math problem into presentations, but one thing that I would love to drive home is that you can't do permanent supportive housing without some type of rental subsidy. It just doesn't work. So the more project-based vouchers and the more rental subsidies that we're able to access for our properties and for our clients is the difference. It makes a difference of how many individuals we can serve at that income level. We have some residents that earn zero income. And so those subsidies make it possible for us to keep them stably housed.
All right, and Mandy's answer came through. She said PHA units will serve 30 to 80% AMI, but the specific mix will be determined closer to the LIHTC application submission. And she said the goal is to be at an average AMI of 60%.
And I just wanted to add too that I didn't mention this before, but one of the pieces that made this project also kind of have some momentum and attraction to both local government and also funders was, if you looked at our data, like when we started this process, we had estimated around 55 to 60 chronically homeless persons in our community at any given time. So this project would get us right to the doorstep of functionally ending chronic homelessness. So that had a big part of how many units we were going for, that we knew we had to make. Basically, we knew we had to get project-based vouchers for, because that's how you address chronic homelessness. So that was also a big factor, that this project will get us right to that doorstep of functionally ending chronic homelessness in our community. So I did want to mention that too, that was a big piece of the puzzle.
And Mandy also said the more subsidy they can bring in, the deeper the affordability can be for this project. All right, back here. So the question is, what is the average cost for an apartment, one room?
Sure. So for our properties, we use fair market rent, and it's based off of the percentage of the AMI. And again, the units with any rental-based subsidies, that'll be determined through the Housing Authority. But I think in Charlottesville, for our studio units, it's somewhere at the crossings currently around $650 maybe a month. But it really depends on the locality, so and the size of the unit. So one bedrooms are obviously more expensive than a studio unit. For example, a project currently that is about to be developed in Henrico County that we have, the studio units are about $900 a month, and the one bedrooms are $1,020 a month. So it depends on the locality, the size of the unit, and what the fair market rents are at that percentage AMI. That's set by HUD.
All right, I'm gonna go far back. Yeah. So the question was, the expenses she just quoted or the rent prices, is that including utilities?
Virginia Supportive Housing pays all of the resident utilities. Our residents do not pay any utilities at any of our properties, and that's part of our model in order to help them remain stably housed, particularly for those individuals that don't have any income. The only thing that they would pay for is if they chose to have cable TV within their unit. That's something that they would pay for individually.
All right, Shannon?
So easy way to ask this question, but Anthony, first of all, congratulations on pretty amazing administrative achievements. Lots of moving pieces. Could you talk a little bit more about the steps from securing the community foundation grant to actual ownership of the property? What that transfer of funding looked like? It sounded like you had another entity actually purchase the property. What does that ownership agreement look like? And what's the ongoing budgeting impact of this? You have so many entities in different costs.
Okay, hold on, Shannon. All right, I was trying to write. Okay, so I'm gonna, do my best. So first, he congratulated Anthony on such a big feat. And then he wanted to know if Anthony could talk about securing community foundation grants to the ownership and the ongoing, missed that part.
Just how we got from a community foundation grant through the ownership process, what the ownership looks like.
Okay, so what the ownership looks like, and then how are you managing it from this point forward? All right.
Thank you. It was definitely a community effort, but thank you. And I think what am I trying to say? The idea that I think encapsulates it is being open-minded in this process and being flexible. There's a lot of new things that many of these partners have not done before, including I think the county for zoning for both shelter and housing. But the question was, how do we move from foundation support to ownership? One thing we did even before foundation support, that there was the idea of probable foundation support, and so we created an MOU between the different partners to begin with, which outlined, at that moment, relatively detailed responsibilities and also action steps that we would hold each other accountable for meeting, which included basically fundraising for money to make sure the shelter portion would work right. That was one of DJAC's kind of responsibilities in this early MOU structure partnership, because all of these pieces had to fit together, and it was quite complicated. And so, could we make shelter work? Did we have the money to make it work? Did we have the partners like Pachem, at the table to actually provide? So that was kind of our portion of it. The other portions were kind of agreements that I think you would apply for LIHTC credits to support the development of PSH. PHAs was quite unique, and I probably can't speak to it as well as Mandy could, so hopefully she can chat in about that. But they're needed. So VSH, because of your funding structure, usually can't purchase a property without going through the environmental reviews and stuff like that. So we needed another entity to come in and actually purchase it, and then those agreements could get worked out. And so PHA was crucial in that, actually being the partner that was saying, we don't usually do this, but hey, this is a need and we will step up and do this. And so thankfully, and it ended up being there's ended up being room on the development for them to develop their own housing. So it was, again, I think viewed as largely a mutually beneficial project. But that was why we needed another entity to come in, actually purchase, take it off the market. I mean, we're not housing developers, TJAC, we're a COC agency. We needed someone who knows how to do that, has the staff on site to negotiate and go through all those steps. I can't speak to those details of actually that process of purchasing it. I do know that so PHA owns it outright now, but there is a partnership or an agreement in the works which would split it into parcels. And so they will, and maybe you should just speak to that part, but I think it's going to be split off so that VSH actually has ownership of that eventually. But obviously there also needed to be an interim access to the site for them to even be able to apply for LIHTC credits. So those agreements were also worked out and put into place. And I think that's, I don't know, does that somewhat answer your question? I mean, we had to early on, we early on created this MOU because thankfully they had an idea of what was all going to take, and I had no idea. I was just like, let's buy a hotel, you know, and they were like, yeah, but we have to do all these things, and thankfully they had that wherewithal. I mean, we needed that huge expertise about taking a property off the market, you know, that process. So we created an MOU, and yeah, I don't know, do you want to say anything about the unique agreement? You've never, I mean, this is new for VSH, right?
Yes. So I think to Anthony's point, just the flexibility is really probably the takeaway from your question, is having everyone just be really flexible and sitting back at the table and saying, well, I've never done that, but let's try it and see how it goes. Our acquisition from PHA will occur and line up with our equity closing and our construction loan closing right prior to beginning construction. So we have agreements in place with them for the purchase of our portion, and we'll be subdividing out our portion of the site. And so, yeah, that's kind of, that was the extent pretty much of our role in that as well. But yeah, it was different from us to be purchasing a site from another developer. Typically, a lot of our sites in the past have been donated. So donated by a locality, donated by a housing authority, and or have a small minimal purchase price, because as I mentioned earlier, those acquisition costs can really make or break a budget for us. So, you know, anything under $1 million has really typically been our sweet spot. So we'll be purchasing from PHA in and around that ballpark.
And again, in case this wasn't clear, I can't downplay PHA's role in making this all happen, because they know how to do this, and you know, we brought our side of it to the table, but we couldn't have done it without their expertise in knowing how to make this kind of thing work with a purchase and an MOU that would make this work for both parties. So, and again, also I'll highlight too that, you know, one of the key pieces too was to try to appease some of the concerns about commercial space. That was a big one on the site. I think there was a lot of plans and interest on keeping commercial on the site. So being able to also develop or include that commercial development was a key piece to making that work too.
All right, we do have a question that came in from our virtual audience. Was the decision to make the property adult only based on safety or lack of under 18s in the homeless system? And I'm guessing lack of under 18s is lack of people under 18.
Yeah, great question. It was mainly around safety concerns. We are sheltering people who might be sex offenders on site, and so that was mainly the reason why we didn't think it would be appropriate to have minors on the site in particular. But yeah, it doesn't mean there's not a need for families with kids, obviously, but this particular project and the population that Pacham works with and the needs that were present just made it fit much better for it to be adults only.
All right, and Mandy did, going back a bit to answer a question. Mandy said, PHA's responsibility included due diligence leading to the purchase of the property, ongoing property management, and transfer of a portion to VSH for their project, and development of our own affordable housing portion using LIHTC. So hopefully that also answers another part of your question. All right, are there any other questions back there?
My question's for Elizabeth. You showed a map of Virginia, and there were 4 areas in the southeast area, and then Charlottesville and Richmond. And you said you were looking to expand. Do you know what areas?
Okay, so this question is for Elizabeth, and it was really, she showed a map of Virginia, and the question is just where she's going to be expanding some of the projects.
Sure. So currently we have properties obviously in the city of Charlottesville, Richmond, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Portsmouth, and Chesapeake. We have a project that is hopefully starting construction in the next couple of weeks in Henrico County, and then this project Premier Circle, which is in Albemarle County. So those are the 2 additional localities for a total of 8. I will say though that one of the really big pieces of how we develop our permanent supportive housing is through regional partnerships and support. All of our properties have funding from multiple localities per project. So for example, one of our projects in Norfolk has funding and/or vouchers from Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Suffolk, maybe Chesapeake in that one as well. And so that is a really critical part of what we do. So while our properties are located in one locality, it's a regional support, and they all come together to help us fund those projects and/or help fund house individuals from their localities as well.
All right.
Just following along with that, could you serve pretty much all of the state of Virginia if maybe somebody requests?
So this is just a follow-up to the last question. Just could you serve anyone in the state of Virginia?
Or do you stick around more to the larger municipalities?
To answer in a short answer, yes, we could serve anyone anywhere, so long as we could find a site and afford to build it there. We, as of right now, don't have any properties, say, in Northern Virginia, and a lot of that has come out of cost for us and acquisition costs up there, as well as just increased construction costs. We would look into rural Virginia as well, but there are also some other organizations that do PSH really well in those areas. So we've stuck to the I-64 corridor in the past. That's not to say that we wouldn't expand past that. We've had some really great conversations in and around the Fredericksburg area as well. So not necessarily, in a major city is a requirement for us. The only other requirement is being able to access project-based vouchers, as I mentioned. So having a partnership with a housing authority or a locality that has access to those is really key. Our programs, though, outside of our developments themselves, we have 3 or 4 community-based services teams that serve individuals outside of our housing. That's how we serve about 1,600 individuals annually. So they also serve throughout the communities as well.
Can you speak to how applicants apply and are accepted into the program?
I didn't want to cut you off. Oh, okay. So it was a question about speaking to how applicants apply for and get accepted into the program.
For ours or for the shelter? Okay. So for us, there's kind of 2 main avenues or ways that individuals are able to access our housing. The first is if there's a project-based voucher on that unit, then they go through the housing authority waitlist. Depending on the housing authority, they either will make a property-specific waitlist for us, or we go through their general waitlist and identify individuals that meet the criteria of our particular building. So, for example, someone experiencing homelessness under the HUD definition of homelessness, individuals meeting our income requirements, those types of things. Another way that they access is we hold property-specific waitlists in-house. So an individual could apply with one of our property managers for one of our units, but particularly those units are typically filled through partnerships through the COC and through partners in that area, depending on the coordinated entry system. Again, if it's a homeless unit. If it's just an affordable unit, those again can come through an application directly to the property.
I'm going to ask, what relationship does the COC have with the PHA for preferences to either move on into this program or for such rights?
So you starting trouble. Okay, so this question is about, This question is about the relationship that the COCs have with the PHAs. And move on preferences and starting trouble is what we do right now, but okay.
No, it is a serious question. It's also vital. It's partnerships, COC partnerships with PHAs are vital. And yeah, for the vouchers that have been designated so far, they're all from the county. And is that coming from us? I can't
I
tell.
think it's
Anyways,
something's
yeah.
happening.
We partnered for mainstream vouchers maybe, I don't know. Gosh, that was pre-pandemic. I can't even remember when that was. It feels like a world ago. But we partnered on mainstream vouchers when those were available. That was a really meaningful way for us to kind of create and structure a preference that was meaningful for the COC. I have a whole lot of thoughts about this that I'd be happy to talk to you about, but you really have to be careful about how you structure the preferences to make it actually worthwhile for people to actually get into the units who need it. And so anyways, we were able to do that with the county, which was great because of this mainstream voucher process, but it wasn't really there before. And then again, we were able to kind of fine tune it a little bit through the EHV process a little bit, even though it's kind of a separate thing. I'll just say the way that HUD wrote the EHV is like, that's how all of them should be written in my opinion, with the COC able to actually refer directly to the PHA for those units. Anyways, there are also ways to do similar structures, but yes, there is a preference, and a part of the preference is that they have to come through the coordinated entry system, and thankfully HUD allows you to do that. So that is the preference with the county, that for them filling the units, they have to come through our coordinated entry system. So that's a plus. Otherwise, it can be really difficult to be on the same page about definitions of homelessness and stuff.
So we're gonna have about 10 more minutes of questions, and if you leave, you won't get the little gamification code. So I'm just letting you know, hang in there till the end so you can get your code if you're interested. So are there any other questions out there? Yes.
What are the types of supportive services that are provided? You mentioned the healthcare clinic, but what other types of supportive services are provided?
So the question is, what are the other types of supportive services that are provided? Like he mentioned
PSH too. I'll
healthcare.
talk about
What are
shelter.
some other supportive services?
So for the shelter portion, it's basically housing-focused case management is what we call it. So it's a focus of trying to help that client identify and move into a unit in the community and get trying to remove the barriers in that process, which can be varied from health to mental health issues, to substance abuse issues, to employment issues, to identification. So but it's all focused with that kind of goal at the end of it, is both, and stabilization, I should say. There's also definitely a key piece to just bringing someone in, especially who's off the streets, just making sure they're okay, getting access to basic needs items, and then very quickly it's housing focused case management. Also, Jason, feel free to kind of text in if there's anything else you want to say, but hopefully that answers the question. I don't know if for PSH, do you want to talk a bit about it? Probably similar in some cases.
You're right, a lot of the services that we'll be providing are similar. Obviously, case management, housing stabilization services. One of the particular pieces that I think makes VSH's permanent supportive housing so successful is we have our on-site supportive services, but we also provide all the property management for our properties, and we have on-site assistant property managers at every property. So in terms of maintaining stability, we're able to connect residents with some of our services staff to say, hey, there might be a lease violation here. And rather than issuing an eviction notice, we all sit down at a table and talk through a housing plan and figure out, what can we do to ensure that you are able to maintain your housing here within, the requirements of your lease, things like that. We also do crisis intervention and mental health counseling, group or individual counseling as needed, and also referring individuals to services within the community that might better fit their needs if it's something that we can't provide in-house, helping them access benefits, driving them down to the VA, really whatever that individual needs to be successful is what we'll provide.
And Jason Whitehead also wrote in that Project ID has been a regular partner helping guests get their IDs, and they've also had a mobile DMV on site. That's really big. Yeah, we need more information about that for everybody.
Jason will have to follow up about that. It is awesome.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
Hotels in general, this will have a number of longer-term residents, especially hotels, people are living there, perhaps groups and leagues, and then displacement issue. Can you talk a little bit more about the challenges that presented and what strategies you might use to make sure these folks can make it to homelessness or worse housing?
All right, so the question was just about hotels in general having a lot of longer term stayers, and they talked about some of the residents that had been there already, and what were some of the challenges in ensuring that they didn't go into homelessness.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went around to try to talk with people on site. Well, first we worked with the owner of the hotel, who kind of gave us some insight about who had been staying there longer term, and from his perspective knew who might have some issues. And so that's where we started, and we did outreach to them directly just to say, hey, this may be happening. It's tricky because it wasn't for sure happening at the time, but we wanted to give people a heads up and see if they had plans. And if they didn't, we asked that they kind of make that clear, and then we were able to support. There was, I think, about 15 folks that we first identified as kind of longer-term stayers that the owner was concerned might, not have other plans. And about half of those we ended up supporting in another local hotel by helping, pay for them to transition over there for a time frame and make sure that they were able to move off to other housing, or whatever other situation. I mean, the interesting part was, these folks were paying for their own stay in a hotel. It was a cheaper hotel, so it was difficult to find a comparable thing in the area, but we were able to assist people moving out. It was quite challenging. Big part of it was communication. So I would say, in terms of getting ahead of the issues, just get ahead of it as soon as you possibly can. Time is a huge factor. And then also having backup plans, having a plan B. So having a stopgap to make sure someone doesn't go to a shelter, supporting them in another hotel, identifying a block of rooms, which we did at another hotel, just getting it, queued up to say, hey, this might be needed. And hopefully you won't need it, but in our case, we did need to move some folks into other hotels to make sure that they didn't go to the streets, so they could have some more time to plan for the next, their next steps. But yeah, communication was key. Getting ahead of the issue was super key, and partnering with the existing hotel, just to find out who those folks might be was a really important piece to the puzzle. So happy to talk in more detail if you have more specific questions, one-on-one, but I think that's the best way to put it.
And just going back, Jason answered a little bit more. He wanted to expound on the supportive services question. And he said, to expand on the case management, Pacham has 3 full-time and 2 part-time staff. And the 2 part-time are also our local PATH team. And one of the part-time case managers is also with the Community Services Board, which is Region 10 in that area, and that's connecting folks to mental health resources. All right, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Okay, 2 more questions, here and then there. So you first, sir, and then you back. Yep.
Could you expand on the site selection process you all went through when identifying the hotel?
So this question was just expanding on the site selection process when picking this hotel.
I can do a little bit of that probably. It may not be the total one, but I mean, okay, so to begin with, obviously we needed to find a hotel that was for sale. Step 1, right? That was big. Then, there were concerns about the site because we needed to really look into it and make sure that it would really work. And that was a key piece that the developer partners, VSH and PHA in particular, were really clear about. Like, yes, this is for sale, but we need to understand about if this is going to work. Part of that is a zoning question, which can be, you can change, which we did, but it's a lengthy process and it can be tricky. So that's just one of the features that we had to figure out. And access to amenities was crucial, like transportation. Is there a bus stop close by within walking distance? And those types of things were really key. I mean, most people, I think, living in Virginia supportive housing don't have their own car. So that was, access to transportation was huge. Access to amenities, job opportunities. You want anything else?
Yeah, the only other piece that I would add to that, other than, for our personal site acquisition standards, we require our properties to be at least within a 1/4 mile walk of a bus stop, at least a 1/2 mile walk within various amenities, including foods and groceries, ideally pharmacies, banks, etc. No significant environmental concerns is a big one for us. Obviously, that doesn't always happen. We've had sites with wetlands or unsuitable soils and all sorts of, talk about later if you'd like, things that we've found, but ideally trying to find something that doesn't have those up front. And then also, based off of our funding, there are some specific requirements that we try to meet, like not concentrating poverty, being within a QCT, a qualified census tract, those types of things. So the site just ended up working out, and it was for sale, which was important.
All right, and our last question.
My question is for Elizabeth. You previously stated that all of your utilities are included within the property for your time maintenance, except for cable. As we move into a more equitable space, what does that look like for internet?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, that was a good last question. So the question was for Elizabeth, and it talked about how all utilities are included except cable, but how does that work for equity moving into a world where access to the internet is crucial to be able to live? I added some stuff to what you said, but yeah, that was a good question.
So we do actually also, which I didn't mention, provide basic cable in our community room, so that's always there. We have the computer room where we provide 2 to 3 computers, free internet access, free computer access, free printer access for all of our residents, and even some of our properties do computer literacy programs in that computer room. But moving forward, all of our properties will have free individual Wi-Fi within every unit.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, so I want us to give them a big hand and thank them for everything today. And present them with their speaker gifts. So thank you all, and the gamification code, because I feel like that's why everybody is still here. So, okay, all right. It's all, the letters are all lowercase. E, echo. R, Rob. G, give. H, Henry. Y, yes. So ERGHY. And then the numbers are 4657. Again, ERGHY 4657. Bingo. All right, thank you guys. You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, well done.
You could have asked
You're a
it.
client of mine.
I am, yes.
Brad says hi at Truist Bank.
I will, yes.
So my question.
Yes, I do. I do.
This is coming from
Michelle Carver. I'm not on here because I'm the